As a storyteller, I've always been fascinated with the idea of recreating this notion of choices in a fiction. My dream was to put the audience in the shoes of the main protagonists, let them make their own decisions, and by doing so, let them tell their own stories.
Fahrenheit: The Indigo Prophecy is an interactive experience made by Quantic Dream, but the main driving force behind this title and their future projects is a man called David Cage, who is the French version of Hideo Kojima with the self-awareness tossed off the Eiffel Tower. Toasty! We start this story with a classic Hollywood setup, in a shitter at a New York diner. Well, if you pick the tutorial, you start with the Cage Meister telling you how the camera controls work. Thanks mate, I never knew that the right analog stick does that. Anyway, we see a man minding his own business draining the one-eyed snake, with another sat in a store carving some kind of symbol into his arm, like a man possessed. After some rejected Silent Hill cutscenes, this bloke stands up and walks towards the man.
So that gives you an idea of what my work is about as an interactive writer, where a linear writer needs to deal with time and space. As an interactive writer, I need to deal with time, space, and possibilities.
No shit.
The murderer and our main protagonist, Lucas Kane, finally comes to his senses and realises what he has done, and in a panic, disposes the body and the murder weapon before the cop that is sitting at the bar gets up and goes to the glory hole. Instead of a stiffy, he finds a stiff sitting on the toilet and raises the alarm. While this is happening, Kane makes a run for it, in a cool split-screen style. Shortly after this, we are introduced to the other protags in this film, Detective Kara and Tyler of the NYPD, who has been tasked to investigate this murder. And this plays out like a typical adventure game, where you ask multiple questions and gather evidence, without the moon logic gameplay that plagues this genre. That shit is safe for the storytelling, and oh boy, we will get to that. Overall, I think this intro is great. It hits you over the head with a stick of mystery, and it got me hyped. It's like watching an episode of The X-Files if it was directed by a mad Frenchman. We flip back to Lucas, who wakes up in his bed covered in his own blood. After curing his hangover with a chili chutney sandwich, Lucas and his brother meet up and have a yap for a bit, and then Kane sees a glimpse of the future of a boy falling into a frozen lake. So the big red machine jumps in to rescue him. However, the cop who discovered the body the night before spots him, but as he just saved the boy from turning into a popsicle, he lets him go.
Maybe he decided I was even. I had taken a life and given one back. Nothing really changed for me. I was still wanted for murder by the police. But when I left that park, I knew I could look myself in the mirror again without cringing.
That's not how it works, Lucas. And the game just goes along at this pace for the first few hours. The cops try to gather evidence, and Lucas goes to work and tries to pretend like nothing happened, until he gets chased by giant digital fleas? Not going to lie, this feels very Phantasmagoria 2. However, the gameplay of this interactive experience is not as abstract. The only question you need to answer is, do you like playing Simon? If you do, well, you get to play it in stereo. Yes, Fahrenheit is one long QuickTime event, where you input the Konami code to make shit happen. Actually, that is a lie, because the input you do on the controller rarely add up to what's going on, and while on the other hand it has the most boring QTEs ever. Now, mundane shit in a game can be used to ground the player in its world. The first example that comes to my mind is Shenmue, or the aforementioned classic adventure games, where you rifle through cupboards and drawers and find stuff. or get a part-time job to pay the bills. But you quickly find out the use of this inert content is because Indigo is padded like David Cage's cell. These sequences go on for so bloody long. And the scene that ties both of these problems together is the one where Lucas has to dodge items from his flat that are trying to kill him. Yes, this is a hallucination, and yes, it was funny at first, but 5 minutes of pressing buttons to dodge boxes is testing my fucking patience. After being tormented by termites, Lucas gets in contact with an old blind lady called Agatha, who is of course a psychic who dives into his mind to work out why shit is nutty. It turns out a mysterious man with a scary voice, a man that only Kane can see I might add, is the gentleman that possessed our hero to kill while reciting Shakespeare, because we need more tropes thrown into this tire fire. To skip ahead, Carla and Taylor manage to work out that Kane is the murderer, so they move in on his house to arrest him, which is now filled with satanic imagery. Think the end of days was somehow less subtlety. And hey, do you remember The Matrix? You know, the one that revolutionized cinema? David Cage does. When Lucas becomes the One, this murder mystery game with a hint of the supernatural gets replaced with whatever movie David was watching while writing the script at the time. It's a tonal shift that comes out of nowhere and continues to baffle, to the point where it feels like 2 or 3 different stories were mashed together. You see, Kane's newfound powers were due to an alien artifact that he was exposed to as a child, and this possession and subsequent killing was the catalyst to unlocking this power. The artifact that Kane discovered, known as Chroma, has the power to pull whatever contrived bullshit David Cage wants at any given time, especially when he writes himself into a corner, which he does frequently. And to spoil the rest of this friggin' plot, the scary voiced man, who is making innocent people kill others in this ritualistic way, is because he's a Mayan oracle, who is trying to open the gates of the otherworld. To open the gates of Helheim, the Oracle needs to sacrifice a girl that is also the savior of humanity, so Lucas does a Kyle Reese to stop Mr. X from terminating her. But wait, it gets better. Out of nowhere, there is another faction trying to get the girl too. This new group is driven by an artificial intelligence, thing that wants to use her power to take over the world. And yes, it comes out of nowhere and adds nothing to the story apart from another thing that Kane has to run away from. Okay, let's break away from this madness and catch up with Tyler and Clara.
Let it crawl.
Yeah, maybe not. This is another problem. We have a main cast that is, for all intents and purposes, pretty fun to be around. Sadly, they don't have much to say, and Tyler is one big stereotype. He was a street kid who used to run with the local gangs, and now he's a cop. However, his apartment looks like a 70s porno set, and he even plays basketball. Also, that soundtrack. And I know Cage is trying to evoke the days of the cheesy cop dramas, but this comes off as racist. And there's even a bit where Ty goes to an antique bookshop and the owner is, well, just watch.
Unhappily, I am but a waterless well of ignorance. My tiny expertise extend wholly to books I sir here.
Okay, this character here is putting on this accent, but even his more palatable accent is just as racist.
Is it just me or did you lose your accent?
Oh yeah, that's for the customers. They love that wise old Japanese master stuff. I was born in Brooklyn, man. I never been no further than Long Island. I'm more American than you are, man.
It's like that bit in Life is Strange, another game that chums my chud, where the lead character Max chats to a preppy black kid, who for some reason has a 40-year-old white male actor playing him. Isn't there enough actors that you could pick to be more appropriate for this character? Or are the developers tone deaf? Oh, they are French too. Huh. Okay, I think we need to cool off. Let's talk about the music. The soundtrack is split between early 2000s rock, that sounds like the atypical Roadrunner Records style tosh, with a Nickelback album lodged between its arse cheeks, and a orchestral score composed by none other than Angelo Badalamenti. Some of you might have gasped at that revelation. If you don't know who this is, you may recognise this. To be honest, I did not believe it at first, but after checking out various places, yup, he made this soundtrack. And you can hear that emotional and dour mood that makes his work unique. It's nowhere near as iconic as his previous work, but it does hit the right notes at the right times. The presentation as a whole is okay, and to clarify, I am playing the remastered port on the PC. And to call it a remaster is stretching it. It still looks like an original Xbox game with a slightly sharper skin. And the only reason why you would play the remaster is because the sex scenes that were originally cut from the PS2 game have now been put back in for prosperity, so you have the pleasure of using the right analog stick to... you get the idea. Well, that's it people, we've hit the peak of interactive entertainment. 40 years of innovation means nothing in comparison to a bunch of polygons rubbing against each other. Sadly, I have to take away this award as Mr. Cage forgot to code in a button to start crying mid-thrust. The problem with the presentation is that you won't be able to digest it because your eyes will be focused on the middle of the screen, meaning all this frantic action, all this motion cap wizardry, which was performed by the greatest stuntman of all time, is being ignored, and on most occasions, it's distracting. After being chased by the cops, McCaffrey antivirus, and a melted 2850 action figure, Lucas and Clara forge an unlikely alliance, which goes against her character and turns someone that had an independent spirit into yet another drone. In the first half of the game, Clara is methodical and calculated. You get the feeling in a very short amount of time that she's been a beat cop for a long time, and she has a savvy demeanour, until this frozen tit comes out of nowhere and says he's been tormented by spirits and shit, and this speech alone is enough to drop all of her experience and just believe him. And just like any juvenile power fantasies, and I felt dirty just saying that, they bone after meeting up. Because why the fuck not? It's not like Lucas was spending most of his time trying to reconvene with his girlfriend. Yeah, she died. This whole affair started at the grave of Kane's former girlfriend, which completely invalidates Lucas and his ex getting back together early in the game, and renders another character to be completely pointless. Fuck me, was this story written by Drowning Pool? How many more bodies are gonna hit the floor? While I might be glossing over some of the smaller moments, which are just as baffling, the reason why I'm doing this is because everything moves at such a breakneck speed, with plot threads appearing out of nowhere and being instantly dropped. So it's hard to do a standard analysis of the plot, and there's some elements I don't want to spoil. So for the sake of brevity, let's double dash to the finale. What there is of it. Because the ending is just a blowout of Lucas killing everyone with relative ease, and saving the world by placing that girl on a stone tablet. And yes, it's just as unsatisfying as the sentence explaining this fucking scene, with a kicker at the end, where Kane explains the world went back to normal, and Clara is pregnant with a supposed new saviour of mankind.
The cold went away just like it had come, in silence, as if the Indigo child had turned the hourglass by delivering her message. Everything was just as it was before. I guess that means the lesser evil. The Oracle and the Orange Clan went back to their places of power in the secret government of the world, and the Purple Clan went back to haunting us on the net. I should be happy, I guess. I've been living with Carla for 3 months. She's the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. Yesterday, she told me that she's pregnant. Must have been that night in Bogart's underground base. That means that our child was radiated by the chrome at Wishida, just like I was in my mother's womb. I don't know what's going to happen now. I'm the one and only keeper of the greatest secret in the universe. What should I do with all that power? Forget it? Put it in the service of humanity? I've never dreamt about being a god. I just want to live my life like anybody else.
Oh my God! Shut the fuck up!
Okay, hang on. What happened with the murder charge against Kane? Was it dropped? Is Clara now aiding a fugitive? Did Tyler dump his bunny boiler girlfriend? Did I leave this plot point out for being completely pointless? Who knows? And how this game was written, I don't think anyone fucking cared. which is a shame because I like Clara and Tyler's relationship. They have a great chemistry, and in most places made me laugh. Lucas, on the other hand, is bland. In fact, he breaks the 3 general rules of effective character design. Number 1, a lack of a decent backstory. All you know is that Kane is some poor schmo who gets picked at random to do this deed that is beyond his control, and then all of a sudden he's some kind of badass with a secret alien power that turns him into a kung fu superhero. Nothing is earned in the struggle, and his power just gets tossed into his lap because he is the main character. Join this with no other goals apart from finding out who did this to him, which gets disregarded halfway through, and of course, and most importantly, he has to bang the opposite sex. Because David Cage wants his OC to be the sexiest man alive. Don't steal. Numero dos. Lucas Kane lacks any moments of vulnerability or weakness. It's like the time when Zack Snyder tried to make Superman flawed in Man of Steel, and how dumb and redundant those following scenes were. What's the point in this? You know Soup's gonna bust out of the handcuffs, and at any moment he could fly the fuck away. And watching this scene back for this review, it's like the writers don't get the whole concept of a person being invincible, and that is they cannot be relatable. You cannot contain them, you cannot pacify them, and no amount of Linkin Park can ground them. And while playing or watching an invincible character is fun in short bursts, playing a game that goes on and on with more impossible shit being thrown at you, it makes me care less for the trivial shit that Lucas has to deal with. You could also chalk this down to the phenomenon known as plot armor, a trope that is very familiar to any anime fans out there, where the protagonist will go into a higher power state to obliterate their foe, and this power normally comes out of nowhere. It's kind of like a Deus Ex Machina but way more stylish. And Lucas breaks the 3rd and final rule of character development. If you are not writing about a character at their most interesting time, then why are you writing about them? Yes, Lucas is being pushed into one over the top set piece after another, but as the player we are never given any time or context to let this sink in, making all this action to be consumed at a surface level. And while most heroes in gaming and action films and so on are skin deep, spending quality time with an avatar that you control can be a powerful tool to bind the character to the player. And I can't believe I'm making this comparison, but take Ethan from Heavy Rain. While he is the relatable everyman archetype, you can buy into his character through experiencing mundane tasks, such as hugging your wife, triggering my uncanny valley, and the scene where he sits down to do some drawing, which pays off later after the loss of his son, and he is so depressed he can't bring himself to put pencil to paper. This hit me harder than everything that goes on in Fahrenheit, and granted, Heavy Rain is as subtle as a Black & Decker to the genitals. When you compare the character building between Fahrenheit and Heavy Rain, it's night and day. While these elements are not necessary for a good story or game. I mean, one of my favourites is God Hand, so I can't really get uppity over this shit. However, David Cage's pretensions towards Indigo being more than just a video game fall completely flat. And while it's a dirty topic to talk about, and I have cringed over this in the past, the truth is, games can be cinematic and keep what makes them unique. Ever since the dawn of the 3D era with the PlayStation and the 5th generation of consoles in general, developers have taken elements of cinema or anime and folded them into meaningful gameplay. For instance, take Devil May Cry as an example. The cutscenes are stuffed full of over-the-top animations that never gets in the way of the gameplay loop of intrinsic-based skill and extrinsic rewards, with these lines being blurred further with the progression of technology. And while I've railed on Fahrenheit for its story and its characters not being very good, there might be another reason why this title, especially in the back half, is such a mess. You see, the original plan was to make this game episodic, like what Telltale Games would do just a few years later. The original idea for Fahrenheit was going to be an epic 12-part series, with a big team of writers grinding it out to make it this insane epic. Sadly, due to the people above David Cage having good business sense and overrunning production costs, the game was cut down to meet a deadline, which if you frame it in this sort of regard, makes a lot more sense. Now, the burning question is, would a 12-episode storyline be any better? Would having more time to tell this said story and allowing the concepts to breathe be a benefit? Probably not. Now, would I want to see this mess? Yes. To wrap up, while this game is pretentious and created by a fucking madman, I have to give this game a little bit of respect because it was one of the first cinematic experience games out there. It was a pioneer, even with its flaws and questionable content. And I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I had a blast playing this tripe. And what I found riveting was just the randomness of it all, with scenes blatantly lifted from other films and dropped in here because the writer thought it was cool. And secondly, Indigo Prophecy was a title made at the right place at the right time, where batshit games was the order of the day. And if I can plug a channel right now, Matt from the Game Show talked about these types of games in his video called The Spirit of 2005, when AAA gaming wasn't really a thing and these silly little projects were getting big budgets. Indigo also hits that cringe curve that you find in films like The Room, where you can tell that it was made with passion but lacked any kind of competence to make these pretty decent ideas make any sense. My biggest criticism with this game is that Cage is trying so hard to have this thing judged as a film. When you look at it as a piece of cinema, it just doesn't hold together. But as a video game, it's a brainless slice of interactive entertainment. And I was indeed entertained. So in a weird way, he accomplished his goal. What I find attractive is the sheer spectacle and the jaw-dropping stupidity, and it kept me hooked. I have a soft spot for this try-hard edgy schlockfest, and it was fun while it lasted, and, as we're coming to the end of this video, was a very cathartic project to create. And with the 15th anniversary edition coming out on the PS4 this month, I personally wanted to see what all the fuss was about, because this game got rave reviews when it came out. Everyone was banging on about it. But when I saw clips of it myself, I just ended up scratching my head thinking, who the fuck likes this shit? So I was feeling down a few weeks ago and sat down and gave it a play. And I played it all in one sitting. 8 hours of this stuff, and it was one of the best experiences I've had in quite some time playing a game. And while I think personally it'll be a one and done for me, granted I played it another 2 times to get through this fucking review, I respect this game. I think it's great. It's got a Resident Evil 6 vibe to it. It shouldn't work, it should fail, but somehow it works. I don't know how, and I don't know why. Fahrenheit is wildly entertaining. And lastly, I think it's safe to say that David Cage is the Neil Breen of video games.